I know that many of you have been waiting for me to talk about how the Fireside LAN went, being the first intercontinental LAN in 7 years. And I say intercontinental, I said international a lot, and then I saw a European on Team Fortress TV kind of freaking out over that being an incorrect term. And I mean, they're right. ETF2L is, of course, an international league, and RGL, for that matter, as well. International, we have Canadians, the odd Mexican or South American here and there. So anyway, I figure a good place to start is sort of the context of my interpretation of relationship with sixes and these kind of events. And it's going to culminate in a sort of anecdote or point that I have already made on the coverage of the event. So if you were watching it, you may have heard it before. But anyway, to get started and keep things brief, I started playing TF2 in about 2012, I believe. And at least from what I remember from my time, the casual scene, it was not uncommon for players to at least keep up with what was going on competitively, if not have teams that they were fans of. This is past a certain point, right? If you've only been playing the game for like a week, sometimes even like a year, it's like whatever. You're still just, I mean, fresh install basically, right? As TF2. But after having played for a few years at least, probably like 3 or 4, I definitely tuned into the competitive side of things, what was going on. And it was mostly through like watching Banny stream and things like that. But when big events came around, I was definitely tuning in. And there were plenty of big events at the time. So the big ones being, and I've talked about these events before, but Rewind and Rewind 2 were huge for sort of my generation. Excuse me. Because these were intercontinental. They were huge. You have, intercontinental on American soil as well. And the representation of not just North America and EU, but Australia as well, and OzFortress, is really exciting. And there was a lot of hype around these tournaments and LANs. And it was a time for kind of the whole community to sort of show off. Gotta make sure, okay, we're good. It was kind of a time for the whole community to sort of show off sixes and celebrate it. And as a result, it was very exciting and very awesome to watch. Very memorable events. Now, that being said, 7 years is a long time, and players always are going to come and go. But especially with things like COVID happening and in-person events in general sort of taking a rest, it very much seemed like events in that ilk were a thing of the past and that people had moved on. Not just because the teams and players who participated in those events, by and large, didn't exist anymore. With the exception of like Banny and Froyo, I suppose. At Rewind 2, Habib played as well. And honestly, Patty was there. So, yeah, just Froyo, basically, being the only players that are still playing from that era. Basically, everyone else moved on. And this includes the community figures and the people doing production as well, mind you. So, a lot of the actual people putting the work in to make these events happen, not just the ones competing. When they're gone as well, it very much seems like that's something of the past, right? And that was something I internalized very much. And just sort of considered the era that TF2 was in a very different one, that we wouldn't see something like that ever happen again. Lo and behold, something like that happens again with this Fireside LAN, which is really incredible. And it has made me sort of recontextualize not just these events, but sort of the community in general. Because going to LANs in general, and I have talked, I think in my last video, about sort of my experience with LANs personally. But it was only going to these events that it really dawned on me sort of the community nature of TF2, because it's literally just sort of people organizing these things, and they don't have any special permission or, I mean, honestly, qualifications. That being said, most of the people doing any of the broadcast stuff and things like that are absolutely talented, but they are not any more particularly qualified, I suppose, than someone who just has the talent. So anyway, it was just people doing this for the game that they like, and that really made me kind of think that, oh, I'm like sitting here, really the only people I guess idolize or like look up to or really think about in the scene are the invite players, or the players who are really good at the game. But no, the people who actually like make the scene tick are very much not just the ones playing it, or playing the game at a high level, rather. But anyway, with that aside, yeah, the Fireside LAN really recontextualized the community in general to me, because it seems like that sort of, well, Sixes in general and the Sixes community is not just in a new era per se, where things are going to be different. Things might just be smaller with like smaller audiences and whatnot. No, it is a new generation, because the shoes that were left empty by the absence of community figures and producers and players as well, high-level teams, those shoes have been filled by new people coming along. And it's really nice to see that, yeah, it's sort of cyclical in a way. And it honestly makes me excited for the future as well, because if out of seemingly nowhere an event like this can just get pulled off by, again, Fireside was like is a pretty new organization. They've been around for like a few years, maybe. But I remember when my first exposure to FiresideCasts was them just covering some random amateur level game, just because. And the production was pretty shoddy, and it was like the production value is not high or anything like that. But it was people doing things, right? They don't need the permission or qualifications. But anyway, the fact that an org like this could pull it off is really, really remarkable to me. And it absolutely makes me excited for the future, because, yeah, I think something like that definitely can be inspiring for people. I know of people who kind of want to play after just watching the event, but even people wanting to participate or do things for the scene in that vein is definitely something that's more likely or possible when you have this new generation maybe getting inspired. So anyway, that was my sort of anecdote, is that to me, this was sort of a show that I don't think TF2 is, in Sixes, is a game that is undergoing different eras of like golden ages and diminished times and whatnot, so much as it is a game of generations. And when a new generation comes in, I think it's important to kind of realize that that's what's happening, and that, you know, you can, that can come with changes, but it can also come with new things and exciting things. And yeah. So anyway, considering that, how did the actual event itself go? Well, if you did not see any of the coverage at all, you didn't follow the tournament whatsoever, it is, or was, the most stacked competitive TF2 tournament the game has ever seen, I would say. I don't know how it fares to the likes of like a Rewind 2 or something like that from a view count perspective, and an overall hype perspective and buzz around the community per se. But I can say objectively, in terms of the level of competition present, not just absolute competition, meaning that the teams that are doing well in the Fireside LAN would absolutely stomp in Rewind 2. And that's just a factor of, people just get better at TF2 over time. So that's not unique. However, in the number of teams that were actually good relative to each other, I think that this event was unmatched, because you have not only, historically you have one good North American team being Froyotech, and then another pretty good North American team that can maybe fight for second place in all likelihood. And usually that was the likes of Ascent, for example. In this tournament, you have two North American teams that by all means can win quite straightforwardly with like a G6 and Froyotech. And then you have other North American competition that is really, really good, that at any other event that isn't so stacked could easily see themselves taking third place, maybe even fighting a spot for grands, things like that. So the funnily named Balls team was one of these teams. Among some other just North American mid-invite, but still like pretty good, can maybe get a couple upsets here and there. And then you have Witness Gaming EU, which I didn't know this at the time, and I actually am very happy for Benpool. Was someone from the European scene who was at the event and doing like production stuff, and I got to talk to a lot, who really elucidated a lot of the stuff about the Euros to me, because I don't really follow what's going on across the ocean so well. I knew that Witness EU was a dominant team in their region. They are really, really dominant, and like other teams don't really even come close. And not only that, but after having lost to Froyotech at a European LAN of Insomnia, only to have the Insomnia LAN series overall stop happening, left a really sour taste in a lot of their mouths, in that Banny beat them, and now they don't have a chance to rematch, right? And they thought that they really had a good shot. So this Witness EU team, when Fireside was announced, was basically drafted for this event years in advance, because the team already existed, right? But they had to make roster changes in order to ensure that they had players who could participate at this event 2 weekends ago when it happened, right? And that's a big deal, right? That means, these guys are really dedicated and really gunning for the spot. I didn't know where the Euros would land in the overall competition. If you asked me, when would it have been? If you asked me like a month out of the event, especially after I did some casting for a European LAN, I would say that it was going to be two North American teams and grands. I would have expected it to be Froyo and G6, just because the TF2 I was watching from that LAN, it didn't impress me necessarily. Granted, Witness EU were stomping, but yeah, it was hard to compare, because their competition didn't seem to really be pushing them to the brink in that sense. Now, that being said, if you asked me a few days before the event who was going to win, when I had knowledge of scrim logs and things like that, where I get to see the Euros at the venue actually practicing against G6 and Froyo and the like, in which they were doing really, really well, then I might say, okay, yeah, these guys, I think they're the real deal, and they might be taking this all. So as far as the European talent is concerned, absolutely really, really good. And definitely better European representation than we've maybe ever had on North American soil. And that's not even discounting the Australians, who the Australians have always, at these intercontinental events, gotten fourth. And I've already kind of described how they're the sort of little brother region, or have been considered that for a long time, because it does seem like compared to the NA-EU rivalry, the Australians have kind of struggled to beat the, I guess, second-rate North American competition. So those teams that are usually fighting for second and third, the Aussies tend to struggle against. And again, this sort of fourth place curse, because they just perpetually got fourth place. But Witness AU, I know both the international teams are sponsored by Witness. They're a really, really good team. And they have a similar relationship with their scene as Witness EU does, in the sense that they just win when they show up. And they kind of dominate their scene. Honestly, almost seems like what Froyo used to be some years ago, before G6 really became a staple and a consistent challenger of theirs. So that could be exciting to see, maybe some time in the future. Both the European and Australian scene could have a similar sort of level of competition present. Because it's been very exciting just locally in North America having multiple really, really strong teams fighting. Nonetheless, though, Witness Australia, very, very dominant in their region, but we don't really know how they're going to pair up against other regions, because are they just fighting against plumbers and farmers, right? Like, what's the actual competition like? So anyway, that's kind of the scene set. All the teams playing, and sort of what they're like, where they're coming from. Now, when it comes to the actual competition itself, I genuinely don't know what was going on, because there was some like mystical property where upsets were just happening all the time. And it seemed like it was impossible to have a game that wasn't at least exciting. Because basically every game seemed at least close. There are some that, especially around like Witness EU or G6, those two teams had some matchups that were pretty dominant, but not like consistent 5-0s. And it was more so like one map was really comfortable, but another map was definitely a little shakier. Those type of matchups, which, yes, still very much in one team's favor, but by no means a complete shutout. Which is really exciting, because it looked like, honestly, the top 6 teams could easily trade maps off of each other. And if you reshuffled this tournament like 10 times, I could easily see 4 or 5 different teams winning it. Like, it was really that competitive, which I don't think TF2 has ever seen. And that is so exciting, because not only is it so competitive from that perspective, but it being, having this representation from 2 different regions as well is really nice. So what was the first big upset and the first major sort of shift? Well, in the group stages of the tournament, the Australians actually upset Froyotech, as in, like, the only team here that has been playing since the days of old, and the team that has arguably the best TF2 player of all time on it, and arguably the best demo of all time on it. That Froyotech lost to what was considered the weakest of the 3 regions. Now, that's just group stages, so it's whatever, but very, very exciting, and a great start to the event as well. So day 1 was the group stages, and then the first round of playoffs. So, okay. Now it's getting pretty late. Obviously, time ran kind of long, as it always does at events like this. But as the venue was like basically closing, they're like, okay, fine, you can finish this playoffs game, but like the actual people gotta leave. So that included me as well, because I was not casting that match. I think I was just on the analyst couch at the time. Whatever. I had to go, and the stream was covering the Balls team, which again is a bunch of really, really talented North American players, but it's not a team. It was a bunch of talented North American players who sure know each other and are friends and have played together in pug scrims and pugs and whatnot for a long time. But they're not a team. It's just 6 guys getting together being like, hey, we want to play here. That team was playing against Froyotech in round 1 of playoffs. And believe it or not, again, that sort of mystical thing, there was just something going on in Denver this weekend. They end up upsetting Froyotech. And I remember watching back, because at this point, I was already at an Airbnb hanging out with a couple teams. And we put on the game because that was definitely something I wanted to see happening. Was Froyo actually going to get knocked into loser's bracket of the biggest TF2 tournament in history, round 1, by what is basically a pug scrim team? And it did happen. Just unbelievable upset. And suddenly, Banny now has to fight through the entire loser's bracket just to get that spot in Grands. And part of me, and this is something that I was saying on the analyst couch, if anyone was watching that, as well as I was just saying it throughout. It is, and North Americans can sympathize who have followed the scene for a while. There have been so many times where Banny's been in positions like that, where it just, okay, not literally that. I don't think he's ever been knocked into loser's bracket round 1, but he's definitely been counted out and considered, lost so many times. And time again, Froyo just wins. So I was perpetually afraid to even think that it was over for Froyo. I had no delusions that this was gonna be the end of things. And even I was superstitiously thinking, in fact, that because it would be such a great story if the round 1, full loser's bracket comeback win would be such a great story, I thought that it was just even more likely to happen. Banny was more likely to make Grands because of this rather than in spite of it. But still, very, very exciting stuff happening. And this is day 1 of the tournament. Day 2, even more huge things happen. And what are some highlights? So, for starters, G6 versus the Europeans is looking like a preview of Grand Finals. Because these are shaping up to be the main 2 teams. For any other teams to make it to Grands, there would have to be some upsets happening, I would argue. And G6 win. So it's really looking like G6 are the favorites going into this tournament now. Despite the fact that the Europeans were doing so well in the pre-tournament scrims in practice, they just weren't able to replicate that in the playoff stage and ended up losing to G6. Now, that being said, they still won out against many other players and teams past that point, but we'll get to that. So, the big one, the number 1 thing that happened to me, or that happened at the tournament that stood out to me and was one of the coolest things ever, was the rematch of Froyotech versus the Australians in loser's bracket. I believe the Australians got sent into loser's bracket by the Europeans, which is a pretty expected result. Again, it was one of those matchups where one of the maps really not that close. Another map definitely more of a fight to it, but still, Euros definitely won, and they looked like the better team. So anyway, Australians versus Froyo. Whoever loses that match gets knocked out of the tournament at 5th place. Well, a tied 5th and 6th place, which is unbelievable for a couple reasons. So for starters, what's at stake here? Well, the Australians have this 4th place curse. And you don't want to break the 4th place curse by getting 5th place. That would be so awful, especially when you've already beaten Froyo in the group stages. Now, granted, that was on a different config. Probably a more, well, I'd say it's a more upset, viable config, because you can kind of just get an early lead and coast on that. But, you've already taken one matchup against them. But also what's at stake is the fact that Froyo and Banny specifically, has literally never placed that poorly in a LAN in his entire career. So that would be unbelievable. And also on top of this, there was a clip floating around from Banny's channel upon being asked how he thinks the Australians would play, or place rather. He was saying 6th place. If they play really well, they can get 5th. So just very, very severely underrating them, I suppose. Or maybe not, if he knocks them into that place. So there's definitely a bit of, not ego, but reputation on the line as well. Because there would be an absolutely delicious amount of irony if Banny predicted this team to get 6th place, only to get 6th place by the hand of that very team. So what happened? Well, it went to map 3. So close enough already to go to map 3. Very exciting here. Because again, you really expect Froyo to just take this. Especially since Froyo is a team that is known so well to make adjustments. And really, really perform in the second half or the second day, or basically perform well after having time to figure out what the opponents are doing and adjust. This was a match that I was watching personally. I was standing behind the Australians, and in fact, when matches like this were happening, you could tell because everyone in the venue was standing behind the two teams, which was really nice. Unfortunately, it wasn't on the main stream because it was like a loser's bracket game. I think the main stream was covering like the Euros versus G6 or something. But it did get streamed on Essentials. And unfortunately, I was on the analyst couch at the time, or at least I was like scheduled for it, basically meaning when the mainstream game ended, I needed to be in that room ready to talk about it. Ready to talk about the game I did not watch. And I had to get pulled away to go do that while Game 3 was still happening. So anyway, I do that. I talk about the G6 EU map 1, probably. I think it was like product. Talk about that. Talk about how the series is going so far. And then during that segment, I hear it. I just hear the cheers in the other room. And I know this game is over. One of these two teams won. And I go out when we're off camera and I check, and lo and behold, oh, I'm gonna need another demo here. This turned out to be a long one, huh? Unfortunately, again, I don't play anymore, so I just don't have demos. I'm gonna click some random one. Hopefully it's okay. Right. I go out and I check, and lo and behold, the Australians did it. They upset Froyotech. I mean, at that point, I guess you can't even call it an upset because they won 2 out of 2 matchups. And they were able to do it. Knock Banny into the very place that he predicted that they would place. Excuse me. And talking to them afterwards, actually, I heard that Banny, in fact, apologized for that assessment, and I'm sure congratulated them because he's usually pretty couth in defeat and stuff like that. But yeah, that was extremely exciting. to see just yet another upset happening. Just when you think that nothing else could. Right, what else happened? Well, that same day, and in fact, I think immediately afterwards, the Australians had to play against the Balls team, who, remember, knocked Froyo into the losers bracket to begin with, and have been playing really, really well. Like, shockingly well. Way better than they were expected to be playing. Honestly, a similar story to Witness Australia. So kind of the two, I remember describing it as like the two Cinderella teams going against each other. This was a match I did cast. And what was really at stake here was the Australians, well, the big thing was this was the 4th place match. Meaning the team that lost got 4th place definitively. Meaning if the Australians wanted to beat the 4th place curse, they needed to win. And win they did. They, I think, won in 2 maps. And it was a exciting series. Snakewater was more of a snoozer, I guess. It was kind of long because when the Balls team had control of mid, they usually slowed things down and just really tried to meticulously pick apart the defense. There were quite a bit of round resets. I'm sure if people are they hate 5 CP and think it's like prone to stalemating, they might use that game as an example, but it was exciting TF2 for me nonetheless. I enjoyed it, and then the map afterwards was almost like a victory lap from the Australians. Despite Snakewater being so close, Sunshine just wasn't, and it was so exciting to watch in real time the realization dawned that this team was actually doing it. And honestly, in Banny's defense, as far as the 6th place is concerned, like, this tournament was looking that stacked that it was very, very viable for the Australians to get 6th. I mean, they only need to lose to Banny and the Balls team, and they're basically there, right? Which were both totally legit options. But they really, really impressed, and they were really fun to watch as well in that matter. So they got themselves a guaranteed 3rd place. They had to go up against Witness EU, who, remember, got knocked into the losers bracket by G6 in order to fight for that spot in Grands. They unfortunately did not win. I don't remember how close that series was, but again, like, there was just something. Like, EU should have just stomped them, all things considered. But I think it was closer than that, at least. Because, again, just matches couldn't be rolls. There was something weird going on. Right, now we get on to grand finals. And it is an intercontinental, sorry, Tweaku. Intercontinental grand finals, which I think everyone wanted, right? Not everyone expected it necessarily, well, depending on the time frame. Again, remember, if you asked me like a few months out, I don't know if I would have expected an intercontinental grand finals, but I would have wanted it for sure, because it's just more exciting. There's more to talk about there. And it was G6, the best team in North America, versus Witness Gaming EU, the best team in Europe by far. And it was honestly, so something that I was worried about, and I mentioned this to a lot of people in passing. TF2 kind of has a long history of grand finals being the least exciting match in playoffs, because TF2 has a bit of a history of just one team being really, really dominant. Again, like I mentioned earlier with, what used to be the case with Froyo in North America, and what is honestly currently the case with both Witness Gamings in Australia and Europe. So you would tend to have more exciting matchups in like the 2nd and 3rd place matches, things like that, than you would actually have in Grands. Now, I was very worried about that going into Grands here, especially since G6 beat Witness Gaming EU earlier in the bracket, and it gave them a map pick advantage, so G6 got to play on their own map picks. But Witness Gaming EU really, really studied up, and they not only did that and adjusted well to G6, but they played really, really well. They showed up day 3 as a new team, basically. And they were not just keeping it competitive, but honestly doing quite well. And to the point where, and here my North American cope is going to come out, it honestly seemed like G6 were not playing nearly as well as they were on prior days, and didn't seem in peak form like they were earlier. Because honestly, like, the one map that they took, and yeah, they did lose the best of 5 series 3-1. The one map that G6 took was Bagel, which was kind of their map, and even going into the tournament, Witness EU were basically saying, like, yeah, we basically, like, never want to play these guys on this map. But with that map pick advantage, I think they were able to secure Bagel. And even then, Witness EU were getting rounds. It wasn't super... I mean, it was pretty close, actually, yeah. And then the only other map that was, like, really close... Well, all the maps were close, actually. But the map that looked like it could have gone either way in product was really just because of bot mode performance on Sniper, in my opinion, kind of just granting a few rounds. But once the adjustment got made, it kind of got made. But it was still an exciting grand finals nonetheless, and historic as well, because this is the first time, I think, ever that a team not from North America has won at a North American LAN. And I can't think... I mean, I would have loved if the Australians did it somehow. That would have been incredible. And I am biased, of course, towards G6, just because I've seen them be the Froyo Slayers so many times that I'm definitely partial to them. Plus, like, I like seeing North America win. But I couldn't think of a better team to have won than Witness Gaming EU, because they... I mean, that's the team that was made to play at that event, and there was so much for them to prove, and they went out there and they absolutely proved it. It was definitely a perfect capstone to the story, and yeah, overall a very fitting end to what was the biggest and greatest TF2 tournament ever. Right. Anything else on the actual games themselves? I don't think so. No, I think that's probably it. I will say, honestly, like, one of the big concerns I was having over Europe winning, and I was a little scared going into the event, seeing how well they were doing in their scrims. What was making me apprehensive was that, and I've made videos, or a video about this in the past, with regards specifically to the progressive rule set and the new config that North America uses and Australia now uses as well, that Europe seems very adamant against. And I've seen so many arguments and been a participant in some cases of arguments over which config is better. And I presented some of the pros and cons in that video. I tried to be pretty objective about it and open-minded, but I very much personally prefer the North American config. I hate garbage time, which, for anyone who doesn't know, it's basically like when you have a hard limit on the timer, teams that are up rounds can just have already won before the game even ends, and there's no mercy rule. Like, the game doesn't actually end. You just kind of have to wait out the clock, and it is some of the worst. It's just not gameplay, right? It's just sitting around waiting. So the hard garbage time where it's like literally impossible to win is just not TF2, and it sucks to play. But I also really, really don't like the soft garbage time where it's technically still possible to win, but you can really only do that by pushing right now, and like any good team is just going to abuse that. So in those matches in the European LAN I was casting, for example, you really could just subtract like 2 points from the winning team, and that was like the actual score. Because when it got down to like 9 or 8 minutes, the team that was down rounds just had to play sloppy, otherwise they literally lose. And the winning team just gets to sort of sit on their laurels and take advantage of that and just convert even more rounds. Yeah, I just personally don't like garbage time at all. There are positives to their config that it just comes down to a matter of preferences, like what positives and what negatives you really like or dislike. But anyway, I was personally worried that if Witness EU took this tournament, that it would be like fodder in that kind of discussion. Especially in discussions. I don't really care that much about discussions of like weapon whitelists and whatnot, but Europe, of course, is pretty different in North America in that respect. Oh, this was this was something stupid. Okay. Right. But honestly, I think that the Grand Finals was a great display of the progressive rule set. And in fact, the progressive rule set favored the Europeans, if anything. So at least I have that cope to sit on in those, if I ever participate in those arguments again. Because if you were treating it objectively, and thinking for the 5CP, which is the config that, or the game mode that config is played on, if when the timer hit 0, the game actually ended, like in the European rule set, then G6 would have won both the 5CPs that they lost. And would have won Grand Finals actually as a result. So the fact that the Europeans were able to win in that overtime was really exciting, and I think a good showcase of the config as just a really as a better example of showing like high level play rather than just fitting really neatly into a time slot. So yeah, no garbage time, none of that. The games ended when the Euros capped, which made it exciting. It made the end of the tournament really exciting because it was a last push where you don't know what's going on, and then suddenly the picks start coming in. You realize it's happening. There's only a couple players left for G6. In your heart of hearts, you're like, can they do it? I hope they do it. One of them dies. You realize it's over, and then it's over, and the Euros get to celebrate. So really exciting series overall in Grands. I would have loved to see a Game 5, but it was really good nonetheless. So right, I think that's probably it for the tournament side of things. What about the actual event itself? I suppose this can be a bit shorter. I really, really enjoyed not competing for once, because as I probably mentioned in when I have talked about the lands I've gone to in the past, you play a lot. You play a lot of TF2, especially if you're on a good team that like goes far. You're going to be playing a lot of TF2 pretty regularly. Plus, tournaments like this go behind on time all the time. So you're going to get kind of rushed to get into that next game. Which leaves... Don't get me wrong, playing that is fun. And I love playing TF2 at LAN. But it also doesn't leave time for anything else. And there's other things you'd like to do at the venue. Like meet people that you either kind of already know from talking to them online or just don't know at all. And yeah, I had a lot more time for that I was really pleased with, because I got to meet a lot of new people. In fact, it was almost a weird experience that there were like fans of mine that didn't even necessarily play sixes, but just sort of like loosely followed the scene and stuff like that, sort of in that old style that I definitely came up in. And that was really interesting. Overall, very, very positive experience. Everyone I talked to was very nice, very polite. And in fact, some people, it almost seemed like they were worried that they were bothering me, which just wasn't the case at all. Like, people would excuse themselves really quickly after meeting me, when I'd be like perfectly fine having a little chat with them. But nonetheless, that was an interesting experience, and honestly gave me a bit of perspective as well, because it makes me wonder if I am an actual member of that kind of new generation, and might be someone that newer players are seeing as like an actual figure, which is a bizarre thing to say aloud, but yeah, maybe. Because I guess I am, at the moment at least, kind of the only guy regularly talking about Sixes things and doing Sixes things, which I would really love if that could change. I'd love to see more people. But anyway, it was great talking to people. Obviously, socially at the venue was fantastic, because everyone there just shares a love of the game, and like no matter what walk of life or what area of the community people come from, when an exciting match was happening, like everyone, no matter how good they were, no matter what they did in the Sixes community, everyone realized like what was happening, and it was like very, very fun. So yeah, just stellar event from that perspective as well. Outside of the actual venue and event itself, I honestly didn't. Well, I was spending time with a lot of people every night, but it wasn't like a wide group in the sense that I was staying with a team that ended up winning the open bracket, in fact. But just close friends of mine who I have played with in the past and whatnot, and I was just staying with. And there was another team as well that I was quite close with and that I had met in the past. So those two kind of teams just formed so many people that it was kind of hard to branch out. So we kind of just spent every night with each other, which was still like a large group of people. It was still a lot of fun, but in the future it might be nice to go to something lower key where there might be some more cross-pollination there. Is there anything else? Any final words as far as the recap of Fireside goes? Again, just a kind of story time, talking about the LAN, what it meant to me, what literally happened, and yeah, I guess what's next in the future? I don't know at all, because an event like this really only comes around once every so often. Well, this is like the biggest event the game has ever seen, so this is the first event of its caliber in more than a decade. Well, more than ever, in my opinion, as far as the level of competition is concerned. So that's something very exciting. That being said, a lot of the players who competed, particularly the Witness Gamings, both the Australians and Euros, this was kind of their send-off. Like, this was the event they were competing on before kind of stepping away from the game. Now, whether people truly step away or not, it's anyone's call. A lot of the people who played at, the rewinds and whatnot did step away long term. I mean, some people are still like around here and there, but definitely nowhere near the capacity of being a competitor. But I guess we'll have to see, because this was in many respects sort of a send-off thing, but the fact that, people were able to pull this off, a relatively new org was able to pull something like this off, does make me hopeful for the future. I think that very exciting things could happen. I hope that this is a event that inspires people to just do things, anything, whether it be organize a LAN or just get involved in Sixes at literally any capacity. That could be really exciting, because I can very much envision now, and this is not something I could have said earlier, I can very much envision an event, maybe not of this caliber as far as competition is concerned. That would take maybe some years to get to that point, but another intercontinental event or another really huge event like this that also has much more buzz going around about it outside the scene. I know, in fact, there was I think a PC Gamer article about the Denver LAN that was cool to see. But yeah, I mean, I just see all these different people getting involved for different reasons and at different capacities in this kind of event, and it is like exciting everyone. And I kind of hope and think that it's possible that it's sort of like a rising tide kind of deal where all the ships get raised. Who knows? It was just fun to go to anyway. It doesn't have to be the start of something new for it to be, in my eyes, the best LAN TF2's ever had. But hopefully this recap was interesting nonetheless. Hope some of the story time was nice. I imagine this was a pretty long one, so many of you will be fast asleep, or maybe you're doing your dishes or laundry or what have you. But anyway, hope you guys enjoyed. I think that's all I have on this topic. And yeah, I'll see you guys for something else next time.